House Speaker Kevin McCarthy dropped an F-bomb while venting his frustration about the hardline conservatives holding up appropriations, dropping an expletive as he dared his fiercest critics to attempt a vote to oust him. Chief among them, Representative Matt Gaetz.
Here to break it down for us is the Hill's congressional reporter, Michael Schnell. Welcome. It's good to have you on.
Hey, thanks guys for having me.
So we had this really spicy speech from Gaetz saying that there were all of these agreements we made to get you elected as speaker. We talked about term limits. We talked about balancing the budget and the debt limit. We talked about releasing the January 6 tapes, subpoenaing Hunter Biden to the floor of Congress. And Gaetz was very frustrated that these things did not happen. So Kevin McCarthy giving this response, it seems like drama. Seems like the girls are fighting. What do you make of this debate between Gaetz and McCarthy?
Yeah, look, I think if I say that there's a lot of tension right now between Gaetz and McCarthy, that would be an understatement, right? And this isn't anything new. Matt Gaetz was one of the 6 lawmakers who never once supported McCarthy during the speaker's race back in January. He did not once vote for McCarthy throughout those 15 ballots. And, the right flank since then has been pushing McCarthy on a number of these priorities, spending being foremost among those. So this week, it's really ramped up from Gaetz. You mentioned that floor speech we saw earlier this week, him essentially saying, look, McCarthy, you haven't been acting in line with this agreement that we made back in January, which included lower spending levels, votes on a variety of different bills. He said, you're not in line with this. And if you continue to not be in line with this, I will be bringing a motion to vacate the chair, which is essentially a way to force a vote on ousting the speaker. Now, we saw, this accelerate today during that closed door conference meeting in the Capitol among House Republicans, with McCarthy essentially saying, listen, if someone wants to bring a motion to vacate against me, bring the effing motion, essentially daring his conservative opponents right there to bring this motion against him. Gaetz answered and said, instead of engaging in this rhetoric, we should be passing appropriations bills. But look, there has been a lot of tension bubbling between these two since January. And today, this morning, it seemed to sort of bubble up over the edge a little bit.
And, just looking at sort of the mechanics of how this would happen if somebody were to bring this motion to vacate, we all remember how long it took for them to initially elect Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. And McCarthy has pushed back on some of this calls for him to step down or be removed, saying any other speaker would do the same thing. What would it look like? And do you think the conservatives in the Republican conference would actually achieve anything if they were to pursue this motion to vacate? Would the next speaker that they put forward, if they were able to pick one, would they do anything differently than what Kevin McCarthy is doing?
Well, look, to start off, I don't think that a motion to vacate would actually pass, right? I mean, it's an open question of whether or not Democrats would support a motion. They have been mum on it. Hakeem Jeffries earlier this week said he wouldn't engage with the question. So that remains a wild card here. But Kevin McCarthy has the majority of the Republican conference is supportive of Kevin McCarthy, right? We heard from members who are swatting back at that, saying that these group of conservatives, some of them are members who never actually supported McCarthy from the beginning. There were 6 conservatives back in January who just never gave McCarthy their support during that speaker's race. So if this were brought to the floor, I don't think it would pass. I think McCarthy would be safe. And I think that may be going through his head as he's essentially daring his conservative detractors, hey, try me. But I think another interesting thing when we have this conversation is, McCarthy in a way has gotten himself into this mess. And that's because during the speaker's race back in January, in order to attain the gavel and flip some of those conservative holdouts, he had to promise to bring down the threshold to force a motion to vacate the chair from 5 members down to 1 member. So in the past, you needed 5 lawmakers banded together in an agreement that there needed to be a vote on ousting the speaker in order for that vote to take place. But now McCarthy brought it down to just 1 because that was a really high up demand of some of these conservatives. So this was sort of always a question of, well, when would we get to, the first motion to vacate vote, assuming it would happen with a lot of these conservatives laying out demands. And again, him agreeing in order to get a hold of that gavel to bring the threshold down to 1 member. So it's a really interesting dynamic there when you look at it, because a lot of this tension started out back in January.
Yeah, a lot of the tension did start off back in January. It's interesting now that we saw so much on the C-SPAN footage of the floor of Congress, all of these conversations happening among members of Congress and a lot of speculation about what kinds of deals they were making in order to win more votes. And it sounds to me like They promised things that they probably couldn't deliver on, being McCarthy and McCarthy's faction. It seems to me that this is almost a reflection of what most voters in America feel about a lot of people they've elected to positions on certain policy platforms, and then they get into office and they can't deliver on those policy promises, whether it's, their doing and their decision making or not. It seems to me Matt Gaetz now has that frustration himself, but also understanding how this all went down, how so many votes went into finally McCarthy getting the majority, or the plurality rather, that he needed to become Speaker of the House. So Kevin McCarthy getting frustrated on the floor of Congress about this, dropping an F-bomb, kind of out of character for him. We did see some tense moments in the past, but is this like a big breaking point in the Republican Party, or do we think that they'll be able to recover from this kind of break in Congress?
Well, I will note the F-bomb happened behind closed doors in that private conference meeting among House Republicans, so not on the House floor. But when you talk about this current moment, I mean, we're in a very high pressure moment of the year, right? September 30th is that government funding deadline. McCarthy has said that he wants to avoid a government shutdown. A number of conservatives had said that they're okay with a shutdown, that they think that, pushing to bring spending levels down, to cut spending, that is a worthy and a noble fight. And if that fight brings them to a shutdown, Congressman Ralph Norman, a member of the Conservative Freedom Caucus, he told me, so be it. That was his quote. So I think that, this is a very high pressure moment right now for Congress, especially when you look at the other side of the Capitol. The Senate is moving along in this appropriations process in a bipartisan manner. They advanced all their appropriations bills out of committee in bipartisan votes. They have been churning along with floor action on those appropriations bills in a bipartisan fashion. And members of both parties in that chamber have said that they want to pass Ukraine funding and they want to pass other money in the supplemental that Kevin McCarthy, that the White House unveiled over the summer. House Republicans disagree on all of that. So it's a very high pressure moment right now in Congress in general, but especially for McCarthy as he has these disagreements within his conference. And I'll also note, Kevin McCarthy doesn't have an easy job being Speaker of the House for such a small Republican majority, right? He can only afford to lose a handful of Republican votes on some of these really partisan matters. And when you have the party fractured in all different directions, putting up different demands, being opposed to different things, counting votes is very difficult. And that's why a number of times throughout this Congress, we've seen McCarthy having a math problem, right? Will he be able to get the votes? What promises is he going to have to make to flip some of these holdouts? We're seeing this again right now, but the odds and the stakes are so much higher because the threat of a shutdown is at the end of the month.
That is true. The clock is ticking. There's a lot of money to be spent or allocated. There's a lot of math to be done by Speaker McCarthy. Michael, thank you for bringing this important update to us on the internal drama. There will be more rising after this.